cold weather survival supplemental gear. That's what we're going to talk about today. Why? Because you guys, meaning the patrons, if you are a patron, thank you. Or even if you're not a paid patron, if you go on the Patreon page to try and leave the voting just so anybody can see it, paid member or not, you just have to get on Patreon. That's what you guys voted for. The cold weather is here in much of the country. And cold weather survival supplemental gear is what we're going to talk about today. Because that's what you guys want to hear about. And I'm here to serve you guys. Also, what made me think about this is I recently went through my kit. One of the bags that I keep in the car, I switched it out for a bigger bag for the extra gear. And I put in quite a bit more winter survival gear. So I thought it was a good time to talk about it. With that, welcome to the podcast. If you guys don't know me, first and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, and I hope to bring that out in everything that I do. And this podcast is no different. Biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and hopefully some relevant experience. Military law enforcement, private security contracting, hunting, and some other stuff in the background. Bullet points in the show notes. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Okay, with that, if you live in a part of the country that gets cold, that's a problem that can't generally be solved with a bullet. I like the tactical stuff. I generally specialize in guns and tactical stuff because I have a lot more experience than that than a lot of people that make gun content. That's one of the reasons I started to do that kind of content, because I wanted to come at it from real world firsthand experience. But that being said, a bullet does not solve every problem. The cold can kill you. Being cold and wet can kill you. And if you're like me, being cold and wet, especially being cold and wet and sitting still or being still, is just one of the most miserable experiences. How can we alleviate that? Well, I'm going to tell you kind of where I'm coming from on this. Now, I currently work, the primary breadwinning job is as a private security contractor. I often have to go into the nearest capital city. That is about 38 miles, give or take, from where I live to where I work. And I live in a cabin up in the woods that's pretty far removed from civilization. But if something happens in a city of several 100,000 people, of which the capital city where I work is, it's not a capital like you would have back east, but it's still got quite a few people. If I have to leave the city in the vehicle, that's great. And if I can get in the vehicle and leave, that's great. But in a big city, in a disaster, of which I have seen, that's probably not something I should put all my eggs in that basket. It may very likely end up that I have to leave on foot. Whatever your system is, whatever your plan is for bugging out, it should have a ability to devolve into a man-portable system. Your Lamborghinis, your Subarus, and the gear that you have on you. That being said, mine is about 38 miles, which I have gone that far in a day. I routinely hike and ruck, and in fact, I have a ruck planned for tonight. I can do that in 24 hours. So this is me. Your kit may differ. But I would plan on, if it happened in the evening, I would probably stay where I am with better shelter, either vehicle or building. I have some pretty secure buildings I have access to for the night. Why? Because it's colder at night and I don't want to freeze to death. If it was earlier in the day, I might try and just leave then. But you get the idea. I could probably make it home in one day. If I got up really early just before sunset, I could ruck all day and make it home. But if something were to happen and I had to shelter in place, or if something happened on the way home and I had to go a longer route, I want stuff to be able to take care of that. That being said, I'm not planning on making this a super comfortable camping trip. This kit is for getting home. I routinely go out and live in the wilderness. I have another bag for that. My big bag, which I've talked about before. You might look up content on the Moab, the mother of all bug out bags. But this is not that. This is a kit that I can grab, that's in the car, that I can grab, that's got a bunch of stuff in there. That being said, this is also not everything. I've talked about that stuff before. This is in addition to. So if you're like, you didn't mention a tourniquet, that's because I EDC a tourniquet. Of course I have a tourniquet. This is cold weather supplemental gear. So keep that in mind. This is not the entire list. This is the specialty extra items that I'm packing for winter survival. I should also mention, I live in the Rocky Mountain West. Your items may differ depending on where you live, right? If you live in Miami, this may be a non-issue for you. Item number 1 I'm going to mention, the Whoopee, the poncho liner. Why? Because without it, you would be cold, i.e. the Whoopee. It's a poncho liner. It's one of the U.S. military's greatest invention. Forget the nuclear submarine. Forget the B-17 Flying Fortress, right? The Whoopee beats those hands down. The Whoopee is a very small, lightweight blanket that's much warmer than it should be for its weight. So, the Whoopee. Now, I have a minus 40, minus 50 degree sleeping bag. Why don't I have that? Because it's big and it's bulky. Again, this is for me to get home. It's lightweight. I also have in here a couple of forms of shelter. I have just a simple disposable poncho, which I can use obviously as a poncho. I can also use it to lay on the ground for a barrier if the ground is wet, which is a big killer, that conducting of heat through your body, from your body to the ground. That's a big killer. I want some kind of barrier. If I throw down a bunch of leaves or pine chats or whatever, if I can get some pine boffs and lay them down, if they're wet, I still need something to stop that water from sucking the heat out of me. I can lay it down as a ground barrier. And then I have an emergency bivvy. I've used those before to wrap up in. Now you can make what's called a ranger roll. Now a ranger roll is generally with the poncho and the poncho liner, but I can do the same thing with the emergency bivvy, which if you're not familiar is like an emergency one-person shelter to keep you alive. They do work. I've had to use them before, but I can roll up in the poncho liner and that. Again, this is not for me to have a super comfortable camping trip. This is if something happened and I couldn't make it home and I had to spend a night because I got injured or I had a longer route or something, I could roll up in it and survive. But those things right there, especially because I could just sleep, sitting down, I could sleep if I even needed to sleep, but I could sit on my pack to get a ground barrier and roll up in the poncho liner and the tack bivvy, the emergency bivvy. But those two things right there are worth their weight in gold if you're really, really cold. They don't weigh a lot, but they are a tremendous amount of shelter for their weight. They really do work pretty well. I also have a pretty substantial fire kit that I added to this. I have a lighter, a regular lighter, because yes, you can make fire with, flint and steel. Yes, you can make fire with a bow drill, but that's not the point of this expedition. If I have to make a fire because I just fell in a creek and I got soaking wet and I'm going to die, I don't want to be messing around trying to make a bow drill. It's not the time for that. Save that for the people that are making bushcraft videos in their backyard. I want heat now. So I have a pretty substantial fire kit. I have just a regular lighter. I also have, because again, this is not the time to be worrying about if I can get a fire going, a hexamine stove equipped with hexamine tablets. I can use one, I can use a bunch of them, but if you're not familiar with hexamine tablets, they are like a cooking fuel tablet. They'll burn, they probably don't burn underwater, but they will burn in really wet, nasty environments. And, when it's super cold and everything's snowy, that's bad. But when it's 33 degrees and everything's wet and drizzly and melting snow, that's worse. When everything's wet, that's hard to start a fire. That's more likely to get you killed from hypothermia. So I need to be able to start a fire quickly. Again, if I have to cross a creek and I get super wet, I need to be able to dry off. And I don't need to be worrying about, when I'm shivering and my fine motor skills are going out the window because I can barely move my hands because they're frozen. if I can start a fire. So lighter, hexamine tablets. I can supplement that with even wet wood or wet material. When those hexamine tablets get going, I should be able to start a fire with even wet wood, as long as it's not wet all the way through. But if I get some, dead standing branches off a dead tree that are standing that are not soaked all the way through, they should get burning pretty well. So again, are those primitive skills good to have? Yes, but when you are in 33 degrees and it's raining sideways and you've fallen in a creek, is that the time to try to make a bow drill? No. Not in my opinion. You do what you want. But a lighter and hexamine tablets. I also have, that being said, a really big, chunky ferrocerium rod and magnesium rod. Not like the little small ones you're probably familiar with, the square ones you get at like Walmart. This is like a big, beefy, burning down Sodom and Gomorrah type fire, steel, and magnesium. If you're not familiar with magnesium shavings, they burn super hot. So I can use that by itself or in conjunction with the hexamine tablets. I can scrape a bunch of that stuff off and it burns really, really hot. And that ferrocerium rod, again, it's not like your little rinky-dink one, like keychain size. It's huge. So it weighs a little bit, but I think that weight is worth it. And again, if I get really wet, the lighter may or may not work, even if I have it wrapped up in tape or something happens and the plunger gets depressed down and all the fluids out of it. I want another way to make a fire. Fire could mean the difference between life and death. Now, that being said, depending on the environment, if it's a non-permissive environment, I may not be able to start a fire, in which case I may just have to keep going and push through it. Not always a good idea to make a fire. But assuming I'm not being hunted or something, assuming I can make a fire and I get really wet and I have the time to stop and make a fire, it's good to be able to start a fire in a bunch of nasty conditions. So that's some of the stuff in the fire kit. On that, for more than just the fire kit, but you guys, if you've listened for any length of time, you'll know that I carry a generally EDC, a fixed blade knife for EDC, for my general everyday. A knife big enough to use for defense and a knife big enough to skin a deer or an elk if I have to and I don't feel, I would say undergunned, but underknifed with that. I carry a good fixed blade knife. But I have a bigger one in this kit. One for starting fire, two for making shelter. Just bigger, beefier. I don't care about batoning wood. That's, again, if you want to be a gun tube glitterati or YouTube glitterati and make a pretty little fire in the back 40 and you want it all pretty and symmetrical, baton wood. If not, just smash the wood with a rock and get on with your life and make a big fire. But it's good for other stuff. Making feather sticks can be useful for starting a fire, but again, I shouldn't need that with the hexamine tablets, but a big bulky knife for cutting down boffs to lay on, for making shelter quickly. I could get it done with my smaller knife, but why not have a bigger, heftier knife? Bigger, hefty, fixed blade knife. I also have on my kit a titanium water bottle. Why? Because if it's not titanium, you're just not cool enough. No, I'm just kidding. For a long time, I used just a stainless steel water bottle, but the titanium ones are lighter. You could also use aluminum. I don't generally like to use aluminum day to day, but for this, it will be fine. They're cheaper. But the titanium water bottles, they're not that expensive. They're one of the things I use quite often in the backcountry. If you're talking about winter survival around here, winter probably means quite a bit of water and or snow. Having a metal container that's not insulated, you don't want an insulated water bottle for this, but just a regular water bottle that's metal that I can heat up water in. Not to boil water to make it safe to drink. That's probably going to be too much energy. But just to melt snow doesn't require a lot of energy. And if I'm hiking and I'm warm enough, I can just carry it on me and it'll probably be melted when I want to drink it. Not to mention I can start off, as long as it's not too cold to stay in the vehicle, I can start off with the water in the water bottle. Titanium water bottle. Oh, and it's more in the cordage category, the string category, but I have fire cord, which if you're familiar with 550 cord, they make a version of 550 cord that has a wick built into it. So going back to the fire kit, I should have mentioned it there, but it's 550 cord that I can use as regular 550 cord. It also has a long, slow burning wick in it. So another layer there on the fire kit. I also have, if you're familiar with the hand warmers, I also have a hand warmer and a body warmer. They make the bigger version of that, the body warmers. Now, call it cheating if you want, but if I can use a body warmer and or a hand warmer to stop from getting hypothermia, I'm probably going to do that, right? If I don't, again, if I can't make a fire, I can at least shake one of those up and roll up in my Ranger roll with it in the dark and stay warm until morning. And they're really nice to have. Those body warmers stay warm for 12 hours. I use them quite a bit when I was hunting this year. I've used them before, the hand warmers, the foot warmers, the body warmers. They're not a gimmick. They work. They're cheap. Why not have them in your kit? On that, I also have extra hat, wool socks, nylon socks, gloves. These are important. Now, this brings me to another point. Your general everyday clothing. If I didn't dress practically, i.e. I wear blue jeans, which I don't even own any blue jeans because I'm practical, and cotton kills. Do I really want to be in 33-degree weather, wet, raining sideways in cotton jeans? No, I don't. But if you insist on wearing jeans because you like the way they make your rear end look or something, I don't know why people wear jeans, but then you had better have an entire other change of clothes in your bag. I generally wear the type of clothes that even if they get wet, they're hydrophobic and they won't stay wet. I also like wool. I generally wear a wool shirt, especially in the wintertime. I wear them all the time, but especially in the wintertime. Again, if you don't dress practically, if you're wearing some, I don't know, I don't know. If you're wearing some V-neck white cotton t-shirt, right, then you had better have a change of clothes. You better have a nice wool shirt. If you go out in the winter without a jacket, you had better have a jacket. This is in addition to a practical set of clothing. But I may leave the house and forget my hat, or I may leave the house and forget a pair of gloves. As I generally hate gloves, I generally avoid them as long as I can, even when I'm cold. But they're nice to have if I need to have them. So I like to have those extra items, and especially, of course, in any bag, even in like a mini bug-out bag, a sling bag, you had better have extra socks. Extra socks are super important. An extra pair of big wool socks. I really like alpaca wool. It's super warm. But an extra pair of wool socks. And again, I generally wear practical socks so I can switch back and forth if they get wet. But a big, thick pair of wool socks worth their weight in gold. I also generally in the winter leave the house in waterproof wool boots. Or not wool. I generally leave the house in waterproof boots. So that's a big deal, right? If you're leaving the house in tennis shoes in the middle of winter, that's on you. You better have another pair of shoes. Okay, in addition to that, in this bag, I carry an entire rain suit. I don't really need the rain jacket because I have the poncho, right? But it's just really nice to have a complete rain suit, especially the rain pants. If you're walking in real thick, wet grass, if you've ever been accustomed to that, you know how miserable that can be once your legs get super wet. So the rain pants, really handy. But the whole rain suit doesn't weigh that much, and it doesn't take up that much space. And that can count as my extra change of clothes. And it's windproof, and it's shelter. So the extra complete rain suit is also in there, and it's in a waterproof bag. So that could be my dry change of clothes if I inadvertently get soaking wet. Now, again, this is cold weather supplemental gear. I'm not talking about all the tactical gear, right? I work at a job where I put on going to work, jungle boots, a war belt, body armor, right? I have an AR. I have a bailout bag. This is not that, so relax. This is not what I'm saying. This is all you should have when you go into the city. But this is what I'm saying for cold weather supplemental gear. Let me go over my picture here to see if I've forgotten anything. That's really it, guys. The things that are worth their weight in gold, the extra wool socks, the emergency bivvy, and the whoopee, the poncho liner. Those things, that can get you through a lot. You might not be comfortable, but you'll probably live unless you're in Antarctica. But if you're smart about it and you're wise about where you go, man, those things, if you don't have any of this other stuff, at least get one of those emergency bivvies and a poncho liner or something like it, right? One of those cheap Walmart fleece blankets that they have in those bins. You probably know what I'm talking about. They may not be a whoopee, but if that's what you got, at least have something like that. And wool socks, not cotton socks, not cotton anything if you can help it, but wool. Those things alone, if that's all you have, if you don't have a hexamine stove, if you're not going to have a giant ferrocerium rod that you could, beat a, brontosaurus to death with, if you don't have any of that stuff, at least have the emergency bivy and some kind of warming blanket. Hopefully something that still retains some of its warming ability when it's wet, and wool socks. The other stuff, you could argue whether you need it or not, but that stuff really you should have. So those are my thoughts on the cold weather survival supplemental gear. If you think I really left something out, then, throw it in there. And your biggest shelter, the most important shelter, is your EDC shelter, meaning what you leave the house with in the wintertime. Even if you think you're going to only walk from the car to a store or whatever, if you're going more than a mile or two from home, you have the potential for that to be a much longer trip. So dress practically. Have a good warm coat, jacket. I prefer when it's really cold, I prefer a bomber jacket. I mean a real bomber jacket, like not some cheap, Wish.com, imitation made in China. Like a real shearling interior, animal fur, thick coat. And or a more modern lightweight version, like a really thick, good, puffy jacket. Those can be ridiculously warm as long as you keep them dry. Right? Probably don't go out when it's 20 degrees outside with just a hoodie on because you're only going to the car. Dress practically. If worse comes to worse and you can't even make it to your car for some reason, at least you can be outside for a while in the winter. Dress practically. I would say there's probably no good reason for you to have cotton socks unless you're just wearing them as like you change them to work out or something. But especially in the winter. The saying cotton kills is for a reason. So dressing practically, I can't overemphasize the importance of that. Anyway, with that, guys, I appreciate you. Your tactical tip of the day, I talked about fire kit, I talked about hexamine tablets, but another real common one is bicycle inner tube. You can use it for a lot of stuff. You can use it to dress up the extra long straps on your pack so they're not hanging off, so they don't get caught up on stuff. And they can double as a fire kit. Cutting lengths of the bicycle inner tube, so it's like a really thick, strong rubber band. Using them to hold stuff together in your kit. Wrapping a few of those around your knife sheath. Wrapping a few of them around your ferro rod. Those things burn literally like a tire fire because they are a tiny tire. They burn hot, they burn nasty, they make a lot of smoke, which you may want if you're trying to get found, but they burn. So you might consider that if you aren't going to go like a hexamine or some kind of like fire putty or something. You may just consider a cheap alternative that's good for multi-use stuff, which is bicycle inner tube. Your tactical verse of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. You shall do no injustice in judgment and measurements of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest weights, honest scales, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. Thanks, and have a blessed day.